Redditors with thin walls, what have you heard in your apartment? My upstairs neighbors taking turns zapping each other with a stun gun, hitting the floor, groaning in pain, and then laughing like Beavis and Butthead. Story 2. I've heard my neighbor giving his granddaughter a xylophone. For birthday, I guess. She could play it well and kept playing for a while. Immediately after she left, I could hear him trying to play something his granddaughter played. He practiced for a solid hour until he managed to play this song correctly and stopped with a joyful yes. It was one of the purest things I've ever experienced. Story 3. Upstairs neighbors were a single mom and teenage daughter. They were very loud. The mom's room was above my room. One day I had off and was woken up by sex upstairs. It was pretty common in the previous couple weeks. This time, though, someone came in and started screaming, "You're having sex in my bed?" Turns out the daughter had been skipping school and coming back to the apartment with her boyfriend. They were the ones having sex in the mom's bed. The fight that ensued should have earned both women awards. Story 4. I moved from far away, so I have a different state license plate than everyone else at the apartment complex. A couple of days ago, I had my upstairs neighbor drunkenly ranting to his wife about what he thinks I'm up to. He's convinced that I'm on the run from something. I'm just in grad school now. Commenter? Okay, but take a second to realize the opportunity you have here. I'd personally play this one out. Give vague answers when asked about your life. When walking to your car, look over both shoulders at least once a week. Fake a phone call while they're home with a vague but suspicious conversation. If you see them in the hallway, ask them if they've seen someone resembling a sketchy character you've made up. You have a chance to be truly mysterious. They'll tell stories of you for years to friends about the neighbor who may have been on the run. Story 5. I lived next to a couple some years ago, and they came home after a night out and started fighting about who was better at darts. I thought they were joking, but it got pretty heated. Doors were slammed. Edit. Since people are asking, they were playing darts at the bar earlier that night. From what I could tell, they were playing as a team, and the boyfriend wasn't pulling his weight and was super defensive about it. Had an off night, allegedly. The girlfriend was mad he couldn't accept she was better. I'm no detective, but think they had some relationship issues bigger than darts. Commenter? There's this new fad of axe throwing. Axe throwing places keep popping up and they all sell alcohol. Who thought axes and alcohol should be mixed? And their insurance rates must be insane. Story 6. I lived next to a guy who took care of his disabled girlfriend. She stayed home with a nurse while he worked to support them and pay for her health care. Everyone really admired him for it. He used to get drunk and tell her that if she doesn't start putting out, he's going to throw her ass out. Story 7. My parents told me stories about the apartment they lived in when I was a baby. The lady above us was a classically trained pianist, and her music room was above my room. Apparently, when I would start crying in my crib, she would start playing and I would go right to sleep. After my parents divorced, my dad stayed in the same apartment. A few years later, when I went to visit him, I was about 10 or 11, I got to finally meet her for the first time. The woman who used to play me to sleep as a baby taught me how to play the piano 10 years later. Story 8. Yesterday when I was taking a crap, my neighbor was blasting classical music on full volume. It was the most majestic and relaxing crap I've taken in a long time. Story 9. Pre-dawn hours, blizzard outside, everything's still and quiet. My roommate and I heard our neighbor on the other side of the firewall fart, wet and deep like a stifled baritone sax, and exclaimed to himself in a twisted combination of awe and disgust, "Oh yes!" We burst out laughing and hear him chime in with pride. Did you guys hear that? Vindicated that his fart was heard and forever lives in our memories. Commenter. This one is my favorite. My dad used to fart loudly in his sleep, and I told my sister it sounded like someone slapping a vat of butterscotch pudding. She laughed so hard she cried, peed in her pants, and woke my parents up. We were in our 20s, so it was kind of awkward. In the nanosecond I had post-paternal pudding fart, I envisioned a big vat of pudding with a hand slapping it. My dad has always only liked two kinds of pudding, and one was butterscotch. So that's what I envisioned. The other kind he likes is tapioca, and I'm glad I didn't think of it, because fundamentally, when you compare puddings, butterscotch was perfect. Tapioca would have only conjured up lumps and a shardy mess to clean up. I told my dad about this post, and he was horrified that I thought a fart he'd slept through was his best. He and my mom agreed that her funeral fart, posted further down, was an award winner. Then he says, "Tell them, all Redditors, I assume, about the time your mother made seagulls fart, and how she trapped us in the room while she air crap herself. Tell them that one." Story 10. An argument about money while I was doing the dishes. It ended with a slammed door and one of them on a piano, hitting the keys like a maniac. Some people read, some people go get something to eat, some people exercise. This mother ducker relieves stress by going crazy on a piano. Commenter. My upstairs neighbors used to do the furniture moving thing. We both had studio apartments, and it was a huge mystery to me how they could move what sounded like a warehouse full of furniture for an hour in such a tiny place. Story 11. Gina, I love you. Gina, no. Gina, damn it, put the knife down! At this point, both the apartments adjoining to Gina's called the police. Gina's husband decided to spend the night elsewhere. Story 12. Not in my house, but I travel a lot for work and stay in a lot of hotels. So far, my favorite was hearing someone banging around in the shower for a while, then this exchange, loudly. Hey, wash my balls. Louder, wash your own balls. Yelling, duck you, your pussy stinks. They got quiet after that, probably because they heard me howling with laughter and realized people could hear them. Story 13. I woke up one morning in a daze, started walking down my stairs. I live in a townhouse condo. And paused and farted way louder than I expected. My neighbor next door started laughing so hard from her living room. Story 14. Our neighbors were once talking loud and I was nosy, so I put my ear up to the wall and realized she was reading him Harry Potter pretty enthusiastically, and it made my heart melt. Story 15. I actually manage an apartment complex where my office is surrounded by a one-bedroom unit. The building is old and the walls are thin. The tenant that used to live in the unit was a quiet man, but would frequently sing beautiful opera music. His voice was amazing, and I loved it every time I heard him sing. Then one time I saw him in the halls and made the mistake of asking if he was the one who sang these beautiful opera songs. His face turned red, but he confirmed that it was him. I told him that I always enjoyed it when I heard him sing and that it would always brighten my day. Never should have said anything because I never heard him sing again. Commenter. I had a neighbor who was a professional opera singer. While chatting one day, I made a comment about her singing. She got embarrassed and said she would start practicing in her bedroom or another location so as to not bother me. I had to all but beg her not to do such a thing as I thoroughly enjoyed it. Story 16. My dad's snoring like a bear, and my mom snoring like a walrus. If they argue, they snore out of sync. And if they have a nice day, they snore in sync. It's really quite sweet. Story 17. Couple upstairs would argue frequently. One particular evening, they had an epic battle. It was hours long. About 2 hours into the argument, 11 p.m. on a weeknight, we heard the woman shout, "First of all," that was the moment we knew sleeping wouldn't be restful that night. Story 18. My landlord has sex with his wife a couple of times per week. She screamed like a 18-plus movie star. They were on the first floor and I was on the second one. Sometimes if I'd walk above their bedroom and they heard it, they'd stop for a couple of seconds and go right back to Boner Town after. So yeah, we were 3 guys living in the apartment and we'd often invite some girls over, friends, to have dinner and drinks, but we would usually stay up pretty late, and it would be in the middle of the week, pretty much once a week. They were the kind of girls who laugh, talk pretty loud, and our landlord asked us if we were having group sex. He wasn't even kidding. Didn't know how to respond to that, so we just laughed it off and kept him wondering. Commenter. I felt kind of bad for a previous neighbor of mine. A few times a week, he got to hear my BF plowing me like a cornfield. I did my best to be quiet, but was told he could hear the different positions I was so loud. Story 19. My ex-neighbors never let their kids leave the house and preferred to raise bubble children. The older son, 12 or 13, was pitifully fragile. One day I heard him crying because he crapped on his own hands. Story 20. Heard my neighbors having sex when I lived in my previous apartment. Our bedrooms shared a wall. This in itself is not unusual. It was like, "Give me your baby, make me pregnant, daddy," waking me up at 2 a.m. that killed my soul. Story 21. Years ago, I had an upstairs neighbor. At 2 a.m. every night, I would hear something sprint across the entire apartment. I realized 3 things. It was very fast, it took small strides, and it never deviated from its path. One day, I saw my neighbor outside and I said, "I don't know how you have energy at 2 a.m. He responded with, "Dude, I've been working the midnight to 8 a.m. shift for 15 years. Doesn't bother me at all." That night, I watched him leave his house, drive off, and waited 2 hours. At exactly 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like 2 feet hit the floor in his bedroom, and the marathon started. A few weeks later, I see him outside. I tell him what I hear at night, and he says, "That's strange. No one has my keys. It's just me and my rabbit up there." Story 22. More what my neighbor heard. I'm a deep sleeper, and was an even deeper sleeper as a teenager. My phone alarm was going off for 30 minutes, and my neighbors could hear it through the walls. Assumed it was a burglar alarm and called the police. Waking up to the police banging on my door was confusing. Story 23. One day, my neighbor was spontaneously singing the national anthem, America, and stopped mid-line and cussed because they messed up the words. So I sang the correct next line and they burst out laughing before coming back in and finishing the song with me. I've still never met that neighbor. Story 24. My last apartment had particularly weak walls between apartments. One night I was reading in bed and I was unknowingly the third party to a particularly nasty fight between the couple living next door. The fight lasted for almost an hour and was apparently the end of their said relationship as she was going to leave him in the apartment the next day. The longer the fight went on, the more interested I became as I pieced snippets of the reason for the fight together. I did not know them personally, only enough to wave and say hi, help them with carrying up groceries, etc. good neighbor stuff. It seemed couple A, both early 30s, were becoming bored with their sex life. For whatever reason, they decided that they would fulfill a fantasy of theirs and invite a third individual to join them sexually. Male A and female A found through some online means male B to join them. I guess things worked out for a while. From the snippets of the fight I caught, male B had joined them on multiple occasions for various sexual escapades. The kicker was female A came home early from a work trip and found male A and male B deeply engrossed in their sexual acrobatics without her. Female A flipped out, and I guess after that point they tried to patch things up, but she caught both of them on 2 other occasions, the latest being the night before fight night that I was unashamedly listening to. Neither neighbor would hold my gaze for long the next morning. I think they were too embarrassed or ashamed to ask if I had heard anything and presumed I heard it all. I even offered to carry a box of stuff she was lugging out of the apartment. Remember, good neighbor. She mumbled something and said no. He was packed, moved out, and gone a week later. Needless to say, it was the most interesting thin-walled apartment experience I have had the vicarious pleasure to be part of. Story 25. My roommate talking to himself. I sometimes laughed quietly at his jokes, since y'all are asking. They're not really jokes, but just random silly things he said. Story 26. My downstairs neighbor, a 40-something Moroccan gentleman, playing various video game songs on his piano for his son who came to visit. It was very cute and wholesome. Story 27. They warned me about you. I never should have married you. My 60 neighbors. And recently a heated argument between different neighbors' adult kids. The son had caught his son playing doctor with his sister's daughter. They argued very loudly about it in their back garden, which is completely surrounded by other houses and apartments. I think at least 30 households could hear it. Playing doctor means getting naked and comparing bits. Story 28. I lived under some Cubans who played air supply when they had sex at the absolute loudest volume they could. They also really enjoyed soccer football, and the woman would make sounds like a siren, just long extended whoa for minutes on end whenever something exciting happened. They were pretty terrible neighbors, really obnoxious and loud all the time. They would mop their patio, and the dirty water ran all over our porch. They also poured out used mop water off the patio too. The parking was terrible in that complex, and they would occupy 2 spaces with 1 vehicle. They pretended not to speak English whenever we tried to talk to them, even before all the problems. I try to be friendly with my neighbors. But they would also speak loud English right outside our apartment, as if we couldn't hear them. So one day I tried to say hello to them and got a terse, rude reply in Spanish followed by no comprendo. So I casually asked my sister if she thought the guy knew his wife was sleeping with that blonde they always had over. Not made up, they were having an affair. There was lots of screaming from their apartment later on, no regrets. Story 29. In our old apartment, our upstairs neighbor had extremely loud, theatrically enthusiastic sex in the middle of the day. The puzzle was that he would stop in the middle, and we'd hear him walk to where the bathroom is, stay there for a minute or two, and then walk back and resume in the bedroom. It was the same pattern every time. We could never figure out what that was all about. Any ideas welcomed. Commenter, my man is going for 2 different rounds. Round 1, do it, finish, enthusiastically apparently. Small break to clean up. Round 2, honey, your turn. You put it in my ass this time. Story 30, heard the couple next door arguing. The wife was furious because she realized he had been cheating on her after she found out she had chlamydia. He tried to convince her that she must have been the unfaithful one. She still lives there. He doesn't. Story 31. When I was an older teenager, I had my own tiny apartment in the hood and a raging asshole gang member for a boyfriend. We would get in raucous fights, and my downstairs neighbor would call the police. One time, I was crying quietly after a particularly bad fight that had gotten physical, and I heard my neighbor arguing with her husband. No, I'm not going to mind my own business and ignore it. I don't care that he always comes back the next day, and she forgives him. One day, he's going to really hurt her or kill her. And I'm not going to live with knowing that I sat there and did nothing when I knew a girl was being abused. I was naive and in love, I thought, and ignorant and young, and I had never considered it abuse. That felt so melodramatic, but I realized that my neighbor was right. Finally left him for good after that fight. So, good looking out random lady in East Lay in 1999. I'm sorry for being the worst neighbor imaginable. Story 32. The way my old apartments were laid out, the neighbor's bedroom was right next to my kitchen, dining room. One night, I hear them banging. Thin walls are thinner when the bed is hitting the wall, while I was fixing dinner. I just turned up the music and continued on with my life. 2 hours later, I was cleaning up, doing dishes, and generally tidying up when I heard the familiar thump, thump, thump of banging. I think, good for them, and bag up the trash to take out. Thump, thump, thump. I open the door and take my bag of trash outside. As I'm walking out, I see the male half of my thumping neighbors, walking in from his car. Walking back from the dumpster, I see a half-naked dude running out of the neighbor's apartment. They moved shortly after that. Story 33. 1. Lots of sex too. My presumably constipated neighbor trying to poop, aka 5 minutes of grunting and heavy breathing 3. Someone snoring like what I can only describe as a diesel truck revving its engine 4. A little girl practicing playing what I think was a violin every night for a while 5. Someone blasting Middle Eastern music. I Shazammed it, and the song is called Mundian Tabaki 6. What sounded like a woman forcing herself to puke with lots of crying. IDK if she had food poisoning or was bulimic or what. Story 34. I once heard an argument that went a little like this. Stop treating me like I'm stupid. You asked if seahorses were mammals, Jessica. They give live birth. Story 35. Neighbor worked a lot and hired a new sitter. New sitter invited 2 guys over. Kids were only 3, and one heard her say, if we leave to go to the corner store now, the kids will be fine alone for 20 minutes, and heard them talking about popping some of Mom's and selling them. Then they promptly left. I walked out, knocked on the door, and the 3-year-old boy came out. I called the police, went into the apartment, found Mom's work number next to the sink, and she was furious. Left work and came back home, and as she was walking up to thank me and the officers, the babysitter and guys came into the complex. Mind you, this was all within an hour, not 20 minutes. Mom whooped babysitter, then called babysitter's mom, and she got another whooping. Got offered a sitting job after that and took it. Also have heard one of my neighbors talking in tongues and yodeling. Glad I don't live in an apartment anymore. Story 36. The mother screaming at her eldest son. Why don't you love me? You never do anything around here. You don't love your siblings. You're horrible. Name, inaudible wailing. So that's fun. Story 37. I once heard a former roommate laughing with his then girlfriend about how they're ducking me over on money. Turned out they were taking my utility portion and buying various games and alcohol. Instead of confronting them, I confirmed what they said with the utilities company. They hadn't paid the bill as 2 months, and I moved all my stuff out that day while they were at work. For good measure, I took myself off the lease and told them about the GF that had been there 6 months. Story 38. I heard my roommates having sex very loudly. I didn't say anything at the moment, but sat them down the next day and talked about it. Turns out the boyfriend was at work during the time it happened. Story 39. My university accommodation had paper-thin walls. You could hear people having sex 5 doors down, and I could hear my friends' music from even further away. Story 40. Not quite what I've heard, but more. Once I realized my previous apartment had very thin walls, my roommate and I would just yell at each other from our respective rooms if we needed something. It was great. No one had to leave bed. Story 41. I heard the couple that used to live next door go through divorce. Their yelling got progressively worse until I realized that their relationship really wasn't healthy. Once she mentioned that they had split up and that she was moving, I was like, yeah, I know. Story 42. Help me, please. He won't let me go. I went and knocked on the door. Guy opened the door with his pants halfway down while a woman behind him kept screaming that he wouldn't let her go. He told me to duck off and close the door. I called the cops, and apparently I stopped the guy from abusing the girl. Felt good. Story 43. My downstairs neighbors are a couple with a 1-year-old boy. The baby's room is right under mine. They speak so sweetly to him, I'm not even mad that I can hear them so clearly. One morning, the dad went in to get the baby out of bed, and I hear him go, "Can you say daddy? Can you say daddy?" And in the tiniest little voice, I heard daddy. My heart melted. Story 44. When I was in grad school, I lived below a family with several young kids. The mother was great, and we got along well. She was always apologetic about kid noise, but I didn't really mind. The compromise that worked for us was that it was okay for me to play an amplified guitar as long as it wasn't late because her kids liked it and would dance to it when they could hear it. Story 45. My old neighbor was a cam girl, and I could hear absolutely everything she said in every single session for a good 4 months. Pretty much learned the names of her clients. I worked from home, and it was always a gamble whenever I had to meet with someone virtually. Story 46. Oh boy. My old neighbors were the absolute worst. Their apartment was behind mine, so we shared a bedroom wall. Loud sex as well as full-on fights at 4 a.m. I heard the entire breakup. She told him to just leave, and he did. She wasn't expecting that, I guess, and spent the next several hours sobbing and yelling, "Why are you doing this to me?" She also called him about 40 times with no reply, then got to hear all her rebounds, one of which came over around 2 a.m. and couldn't keep it up, which led to her yelling at him. That didn't stop them, though. They kept trying for hours, and when we knocked on the wall, they knocked back. Idiot. I have a job to get to in 3 hours. How I hated her. Another time I overheard her almost overdose in the bathroom. The BF called her parents, who called an ambulance. When her BF left, she also stopped taking care of her dog, so she would just take it right outside her front door to crap and never cleaned it up. I don't even know her name, but I know more about her personal life than probably most of her friends do. Story 47. Recently downstairs, girl has acquired a dog that, 1, she doesn't take on walks 2. She leaves at home, out of a crate. I hear her come home and yell /scream/throw crap at this poor dog. It's heartbreaking. And since no one else in the fourplex is home, I'm kind of scared to call animal control in case this crazy git decides to make my life hell for reporting her. Suggestions welcome. This has been tearing at my conscience for the last 2 weeks. Story 48. In college, I lived in a crappy apartment nearby the school that was mostly populated by students. Halfway to class one day, I realized I forgot a book and had to rush back to my apartment to get it. As I was running up the stairs, which shared a wall with the stairs in the next-door apartment, which mirrored my own, I could have sworn I heard someone yelling. I ignored it and ran to my room to grab my book. As I clambered downstairs, again I heard yelling and I paused to listen. I heard some unintelligible moaning and eventually heard the words, "Help me," weakly groaned from the stairs next door. I rushed out and tried their door, but it was locked. I totally forgot about my class and ran to the apartment management office, hoping that someone was there. A manager was, thank goodness. And after I explained the situation, she grabbed her master keys and we booked it back to my neighbor's place. She opened the door and the poor guy was laying in the stairwell. It was one of the ones that goes up halfway to the second floor, then turns 90 degrees for the rest of the way, clearly having fallen. I called 911 while the manager ran over to the guy. Ambulance came and picked him up, and I later learned that he had fallen down the stairs after passing into a brief diabetic coma. I guess he hadn't eaten in some time. I don't know too much about how diabetes works. Anyhow, to this day, I feel grateful that I forgot that book. That poor guy could have died, slumped halfway down the stairs with his face in the carpet. Story 49. My neighbor has a lot of cats. If anyone who's encountered cats before, you know that when they're in heat, they tend to make these god-awful ducking, screeching noises. It sounds like something out of a horror movie. One night I was sleeping after working a 16-hour shift only to hear that crap coming from the other side of my bedroom wall. I almost called the police. Story 50. I lived in an apartment where the kids next door would begin kicking and banging on the walls and making all kind of noise on any given day starting at around 7 a.m. and continuing for hours. I eventually came to find out that their mother would lock them in a bedroom and leave for hours on end to do who knows what. Story 51. This isn't necessarily what I overheard. Both me and my mother were out of town when it happened. She was coming home when it happened, and I was down south visiting my dad for Christmas. But about 11 years ago, when I was like 6, some kid who snuck into our apartment building shot and killed a cop right in front of our apartment door. The dude was sneaking into his GFS apartment because her parents weren't home, and the cop asked him if he lived there. The kid lied, and I'm guessing the officer found out, so there was a bit of a scuffle. At one point or another, the kid got a hold of the cop's gun and shot him while he was down after falling down the stairs. When my mom got home, our door was broken into due to the officers looking for the guy. They tracked in brains into our house, apparently, so that's fun. The crappiest part, though, was this little scarecrow I had outside our door that my mom had to throw away. This also happened right after Christmas, so it was probably extra traumatic for both the victim and the shooter's family. I don't even live in a dangerous part of Metro Detroit. I live in the suburbs, so it was really shocking. The officers at the police station where the cop was from come and light candles with his badge number every year on the anniversary. I'm almost 18 now, and I think about that cop every time I walk in the communal hallway. If you want to learn more, just Google it. I'm sure many articles will pop up. It was highly covered in Michigan, the rest of the country. It wasn't a Detroit PD officer. It was the local police department. Might have actually been a state officer because I live right next to their station. Story 52. My downstairs neighbor has a genuinely beautiful singing voice. She thinks she's just singing to herself, but sometimes I stop what I'm doing to listen because it's so beautiful. Am I invading her personal space by eavesdropping without telling her? Story 53. My downstairs neighbor is a fit, active, and energetic woman in her mid-60s who looks like she's in her late 40s. She's doing herself good at almost any hour of the day, a few times a week, which normally would be fine, but she cries when she does it. She cries, moans. It is incredibly strange, and it's the worst when it wakes me up at 3 a.m. Story 54. Lived next door to an elderly couple. Woman was complaining at 2 a.m. that she needed ginger ale because her doctor told her to drink it, and he had to go buy some. Story 55. The people above me bang at exactly 1 p.m. every day. I'm not here then most days, but when I am, it sucks. They have the squeakiest bed ever, and it's so loud it sounds like it's in my room. Our whole apartment can hear it. They really to invest in a better bed frame or whatever. Story 56. Everything that goes on in the parking lot. Sounds like I have a window open even though I don't. People blaring music, car alarms going off. Just crap like that, and it keeps me up all night. Story 57. I used to live in a sketchy building, and my landlord lived right underneath me. My landlord was a weird guy, and there were all kinds of rumors about him the whole time I lived there, but I just tried to chalk it up to gossip. There were a ton of homeless people in the neighborhood, which was fine. They were just part of the neighborhood, and anyone who lived there knew them. A lot of days they would hang out on our front stoop, and no one really cared or made an issue out of it. Anyway, I would often hear knocks that sounded like they were coming from the windows, not the front door. I would try to run over and catch Westcourt for it was, but could never catch anyone in time. So one night I hear the knocking while I'm in bed, and it sounds like it's from the window right under me to my left, so I look down real quick. See one of the regular homeless guys in the neighborhood, and see my landlord open up the door and let him in. So I lay there, listening, wondering UTF is going on. And as clear as day, I hear the homeless guy say to my landlord, "I need something to eat. I was just wondering if you needed a back rub or something." That's when I realized all the rumors I had heard about my landlord and tried to brush off were actually true. Story 58. My neighbor across the hall, middle-aged man, blasts Rihanna and argues on the phone, and my old neighbor below me snored. Not complaining, though. When you live in an apartment building, you're going to hear other people. The only time I got annoyed with hearing my neighbors was when someone was trying to play Christmas songs on a trumpet. I hate Christmas songs, so hearing someone struggling on a trumpet gets real annoying, real fast. Story 59. So many things. 1. Dude. Downstairs tried to learn Eric Clapton's Tears in Heaven for months, but could only play the first 3 notes. 2. Upstairs neighbor playing the organ. I knew him, so if I heard him, I'd text him song requests. 3. Different downstairs neighbor used to have long, loud weekday parties. We told them to SEFU around 11 p.m., and they did, until they started again at 3 a.m., called the cops, and had a good time listening through the floorboards to them, bullcrafting, and trying to defend themselves. 4. The best one, the exploits of the neighbor's 4-year-old son. Most mornings he was happy, but some mornings he had meltdowns. He was very good at yelling, "I don't want to," and by the sounds of it, there were a lot of things he didn't want to do, but the rest of his sentences were lost to whining and crying. I got to hear about the theme he wanted for his next birthday party, and how his hand now smelled like poop because he accidentally touched his butthole. One morning, he was super happy to go to preschool, and then he had a meltdown and didn't want to go anymore because he got his sock wet. Great kid. Story 60. Whilst at uni, we lived next door to a 40-something-year-old guy who lived with his elderly mother. One time I was home alone studying and heard him play and sing a very aggressive version of the 60s Batman theme tune. Story 61. A young couple moved in next door and they had to be late teens, early 20s. Every day, without fail, I would be unwillingly hear dramatic arguments about how his family doesn't accept her, or that he was texting other girls. One time she yelled, "You don't fight for us, Kevin!" I was so exasperated, yet so emotionally absorbed in this soap opera, I had relentlessly been subjected to that. I also yelled, "Fight for her, Kevin!" It was followed by eerie silence. I know it was wrong of me to interject myself. But crap, man, what about me? What about my feelings? They moved out shortly after that. Story 62. I don't really have thin walls, but my neighbor and his girlfriend have no concept of inside voices, so I can hear everything they say. It makes me so miserable because he's such an annoying asshole. Story 63. Father used to live in a trailer park. I have nothing against trailer parks, but this one was pretty bad. We heard a loud bang. Sounded like a .22. It wasn't overly loud then. "Did you get him?" Voice 2. "Yeah, he's dead all right." First voice. "That'll teach him not to go near your substances." Cops were called. Turns out these guys shot a banana roach with a handgun. Both arrested for substances charges. One with discharging a firearm improperly. Story 64. Every night I would hear my hardcore alcoholic neighbor puke in the sink. Jam to her party music, usually Concrete Blonde on full blast. Puke again, drag her fold-out bed out of the closet, then turn on all her fans to go to bed. Her routine. I stopped hearing it. All I heard were the fans. Knew in my gut something was wrong, but kept pushing it away. I was avoiding her in order to build up some boundaries between us. Silence for 5 days straight. She had been dead in there for 5 days. Autopsy said heart and liver issue due to chronic alcoholism. After the body was removed, I let her son into her apartment as I had a spare key. Some decomposition on her rollout bed, but no smell other than her usual smell. He thanked me for being the only regular person in her life, and I felt so guilty. Keep an ear out for silence, friends. Story 65. When I was young, around 10 years old, I remember sitting in my parents' room with my dad. We lived on a college campus and both heard, very clearly, a woman in the apartment next door getting the absolute crap beat out of her by a man. The next day, we saw detectives, not just regular police, outside the apartment. I told my dad we should say something, and he let me know that he didn't want to get involved. It still haunts me to this day 20 years later. Story 66. Back when I was starting to learn the violin and still sounded like a duck in pain, I lived in a cheap apartment next to a preacher and his family. I happened to be practicing one day, and they responded by turning up their TV louder and louder. When this failed to drown me out, I heard, "O Lord that art in heaven, may you use your divine mercy to cast out the evil spirits that doth make that hellish noise like a billion damned souls." When that failed, the guy's wife went right up to the wall and yelled, "Whatever the hell that is, knock it off!" Story 67. Domestic violence. Once heard the addicted downstairs neighbor being strangled by her boyfriend. Woke up at 3 a.m. to thumping on the walls and heard noises. Then a squeaker, "Stop, I can't breathe," followed by more choking noises. I called the cops immediately, and they showed up like 2 minutes later, arrested the guy for battery, possession, and paraphernalia. Because I requested a follow-up phone call, I was told at about 5 a.m. that she put in for an order of protection against him, and I shouldn't have to worry about his BS anymore. Saw him again going back into that apartment about 2 weeks later. The neighbor, probably 55 but looked 70, cursed me out a month or so later. After she figured out it was me, they called the cops. I guess she preferred death to not having her Met friend around. Story 68. Child abuse. Beatings and horrific name-calling. The police DGF. They won't even send an investigation unless I actually see something. But it's just the sounds of smacking, screams, and sobbing through a wall. Story 69. I lived on the second of 3 floors. Below me, there was a couple who scheduled their fights for Saturday night. You could hear the female absolutely berating the male, saying how he looked at another girl while they were out or something like that, and he would do nothing but resignedly respond in a monotone voice. I couldn't hear his side. It was very much like the teacher in Charlie Brown. Then, the morning after, without fail, they would have crazy loud makeup sex. Above me was a drummer. Now I wouldn't mind it, except he practiced early and late and never really got any better. It was painful. Luckily, he was kicked out and the punching bag guy took his place. At least he kept a consistent beat, even when it shook my entire apartment. Story 70. A child yelling, "Stop hitting me!" I called the cops on them several times and never regretted it once. New upstairs neighbors are 1,000 times better. Now I listen to their kitty get the zoomies and run up and down the hall. Story 71. An ex-girlfriend, as I lived in an apartment with upstairs neighbors, would yell and scream at each other on a constant basis. It came to a head when the woman started beating their dog. We heard the poor dog yipping and howling and ended up calling the cops, and they had their dog taken away. We also took in a kitten that they had that showed up at our door with its whiskers cut off and a cigarette burn on its head. The woman showed up at our door demanding her kitten back and backed down when we threatened to call the cops again. These people were not winners. They ended up being served an eviction notice eventually, squatted there anyway, and were arrested. I have no idea what happened to them after that. Story 72. My husband and I have lived in apartments since we got married over 8 years ago, so each place has its most memorable neighbor story. Believe it or not, none of these places seemed like bad places to live on face value. However, the first 3 turned out to be pretty crappy the longer we stayed. First place. We heard domestic violence in the apartment beneath us, where the husband literally threw the wife into a wall. We called the cops immediately, and so did the neighbors next door. The cops showed up and took everyone's statements, and the couple broke up and the guy moved out very shortly after. The woman didn't stay long, but at least she didn't have to stay with that guy anymore. Second place. We were just settling onto the couch in the evening to watch a movie, when suddenly we heard wild screaming from upstairs and loud thumping as someone stumbled down the stairs. It was our female neighbor, screaming that her cousin was going to beat her. My husband charged outside to grab our neighbor's hand and pull her into our apartment, and I called the police. Turns out, she'd been letting her cousin stay for a few weeks, and the cousin had some major mental health issues. Thankfully, our neighbor didn't get beaten, but half of her weave had been ripped out and her scalp was injured a bit. The cousin got arrested a few days later, for reasons unknown. So, thankfully, things were quiet for us and our neighbor after that. Third place, heard our next-door neighbor, a young woman living alone, getting extremely drunk and trying to assault some of our other neighbors who were having a party in the same building. Then when the cops were called, the drunk woman charged at an officer and they had to tase her. First time didn't faze her at all. Second time finally knocked her down so they could take her in. A month later, she knocked on our door absolutely wrecked and ill. Turns out, she'd been trying to get sober, but a crap friend had brought her some alcohol and she drank the whole thing, and it was horribly interfering with one of her meds. We tried our best to help her, she could barely walk, and called an ambulance when she asked and made sure that her dog had food and water. Her parents came and helped her move out shortly after that. I'm pretty sure she checked herself into rehab. I hope she's doing better now. Fourth and current place. Thankfully, our fourth apartment is a lot calmer than previous homes we've had. There has been the occasional loud argument or party, but mostly people here keep to themselves. A lot more people have cats here, so during the day when everyone is out, you'll see a bunch of cats sitting in windows watching the outside. Very wholesome. Story 73. My previous apartment was an absolute crap hole owned by a guy who can most accurately be described by the word slumlord. He rented primarily to illegal immigrants, less convicted felons, people who would be afraid to complain about the living conditions. I am not an illegal immigrant, nor am I a convicted felon, and I made this landlord's life hell by demanding that he fix everything that wasn't up to code and notifying the Board of Health when he didn't. The family to our right was a Mexican family, a couple, and their 4 elementary school-aged children. One night, I heard them arguing about trying to get their family out of this crap-hole apartment complex and into a better living situation. All of a sudden, the lady yelled, "You didn't even have the balls to make," the landlord, "fix the broken septic tank. Maybe I should be having this conversation with the kid next door." I'm pretty sure I laughed loud enough to be heard by the entire complex. Story 74. My upstairs neighbor was having a swingers party, with the windows open so everyone could hear. So me and my ex yelled things like, "Pull her hair!" and "Slap that ass!" to laughter from upstairs. The next morning, we received a note on our door. It said we were both cordially invited to next week's swingers party. A quick look at the guests leaving later that day made our decision for us. There were a lot of dirty hippies in that group. Story 75. Not what I'd heard, but what I'd done. Post-shower lounging and towel. PC is on the floor because I'm broke and can't afford a table. Sit down and don't realize my ass is on the carpet since it felt like the towel. And I farted. I mean, a massive fart. The way I was sitting had it drumming on the floor like a bomb. Then, there was a moment of shocked silence before I heard through the floor, "What the hell?" Story 76. My old roommate's bedroom was right next to mine and I could hear him playing video games all the time. He was always playing with his friend online named Fred. It wasn't until maybe a month later that I found out that Fred was short for Frederica and she was from Europe. Just kind of blew my mind. Story 77. My next door neighbor in college would snooze his alarm, head to the gym, and then his alarm would go off until he got home. I finally left an angry post-it on his door that said, "Turn off your alarm." Anyway, we met years later and now we're married with kids. Story 78. That late to this thread. But for a while, I lived next to some Mormon missionaries. Super nice girls. I once apologized to them because my bird was a bit of a squeaker. They told me they didn't mind. I was homesick from work one day, and they were singing to my bird through the wall. It was so cute, I almost died. Story 79. Late at night, I used to tap on my windowsill while I waited for the sun to come up. One day, I heard a faint tap return. After testing it a few times, me and my neighbor had a tapping conversation back and forth for around 20 minutes. It was wholesome and helped me actually sleep instead of tossing and turning until sunrise. Story 80. A few years ago, we used to hear our neighbors a lot. My favorite two instances were, 1. When they got a rescue puppy, we heard them discover that it had crap in their bed while they were out too. After they had a late night out, at about 3 a.m., we heard them having sex, or so we thought. A few minutes later, we heard the husband come back. The fistfight that ensued ended with one party having their head slammed into a radiator. Least favorite instance was when we heard them beat the dog. We called the RSAPCA immediately when we heard that, and the dog was removed from their care. They were deeply unpleasant people, as I'm sure you can imagine based on these stories. Story 81. Girlfriend and I were laying in bed at night. It was probably around 11:30 p.m. when we hear our neighbor scream, "I love tomatoes!" And that was all that we heard. Story 82. The people in the apartment next door were both girls. One had a saxophone and kept playing Careless Whisper. Then the saxophone stops, having a few minutes of silence follow. Then I hear one of them say, "We forgot about Jedi," which was followed by a door slam. Turns out Jedi was their dog, and they forgot he went outside to use the bathroom. Someone found him about a block over. Not the funniest story, but probably one that went from 0 to 100 real fast. Story 83. New duplex neighbor Mark, freshly divorced white guy in it that kept to himself. These are studio apartments, so just one big room. I don't watch TV, so I lead a pretty quiet life, so Mark's life became fascinating. Didn't talk other than initial greet, where he said he'd begun learning the guitar as men in that situation do. I heard Abstract's Seven Nation Army on repeat, sometimes with strange voices you only use in private, like a Jamaican Kermit the Frog, sometimes cursing at himself, and sometimes just a couple ill-timed plucks in between intervals of crying, ranging from small sniffles to a couple heaving, soul-shredding, throat-straining animal cries. I would see him taking out the trash and feel like I knew him. I could hear his calls to his mom, honest, to his friends, exaggerated and followed by long sighs, to his lawyer, defeated, broken. I heard his pizza order, his views on ref calls, his own rendition of a cooking show when he would describe wetting a paper towel and wrapping leftover pizza in it before microwaving it. He kept at the guitar nearly every night and could eventually play on time, but never really played any other songs. Just kept patiently practicing that one. Skip a couple rough months forward to me losing my mind silently through the wall when he played it for his date. Ducking, I was on the edge of my seat, flailing my arms like a conductor. I felt like a pageant mom. My man, Mark, played it flawlessly, and the girl loved it. I cried. Through the wall, just a part of some other story, but feeling right there with this stranger. Don't know how my emotions got involved, but I was so proud of him. I regret not telling him that I knew when I moved out. Maybe he knew. Mark, you ducking legend, you were right. They couldn't hold you back. Keep going and don't doubt yourself, Jamaican Kermit be believing in you, mon. Story 84. I woke up at 6 a.m. hearing the sound of a nuclear warning siren on full blast coming from the bedroom wall connected to mine, like shockingly loud. 1 minute later, it changes to a car alarm. 1 minute later, it's a whistle, so on and so forth for 1.5 hours. I went to work angry and sleepy, thinking who would leave such a thing on and not be home to turn it off. It happens again the next morning too, and after 30 minutes staring at my wall, I go over and knock loudly on the door. No answer. Again, I think who would go on vacation and leave such an obnoxiously loud thing? Alarm? What is happening over there? On before leaving the house. On the fourth day in a row, this happened. I call my landlord and leave a stern letter in the door and head to work again, sleepy and mad. Upon returning home, there is a note in my door that reads, "I am so sorry. I did not realize our walls were so thin and it was waking you up. I just moved in. I am a deep sleeper and need this every morning to wake up. From a coma? I will try to turn it down some and move it off of our shared wall." They did turn it down from a 9 to like a 3. 4, but I still hear it every morning. FML. 6 months later, I am moving apartments next week. Story 85. This was our first encounter of the new neighbors moving in upstairs. Wife. "If you fart one more time, you will regret it." The door slams. Opens back up. Thunder coming down the stairs as he is running from her. Glass breaking. Then the undeniable sound of the fire extinguisher. Wife. "There, mother ducker, since you ass seems to be on fire." "Yeah, welcome to the neighborhood." She sprayed her husband and our front door down with the fire extinguisher in the first 10 minutes. It only went downhill from there. Went downhill from Story 86. I heard a man yelling and slamming things around, then heard a woman screaming and running around. I thought she was being murdered. This happened at 3 a.m. Turns out it was just a ducking bat flying around. Story 87. This happened about 5 years. I had lived in a townhouse and I heard crying noises every night. I never really thought anything about it. Until one day I heard the girl from next door running away from her drunk husband. I called the cops. And they said, "Say he has a bad criminal history." I felt bad for not calling the cops earlier. Story 88. I lived next to a guy who was schizophrenic. At first the stuff I would hear freaked me out, but after getting to know him I realized he was a really nice guy. There was some pretty sad stuff, but some of it could be funny too. My favorite was when his voice took on this righteous southern preacher tone as he reprimanded all of his appliances like, "Microwave oven, are you going to join me in the afterlife? No, miniature refrigerator. Are you going to escort me through the valley of the shadow of death? I think not." And then my favorite, simply, "Printer, duck off." Story 89. When myself and my housemates were moving into our new house, we were cooking some food in our kitchen and living room and messing around. We were all singing really loudly and badly. Lots of really dramatic wailing like opera singers and just not taking ourselves too seriously. And when we finally hit this incredibly high note, I think it was ABBA. We heard that our neighbors were laughing and applauding us. We loudly shouted sorry and just tried to keep quiet for the rest of the night, but they seemed pretty chill with it. Story 90. One of my flatmates is French, so one night after going out, he brought a girl back home, told her he was French and everything, and while they were having sex, she told him to speak to her in French. My flatmate, still being completely drunk, didn't think of anything else, and started counting in French, to which I couldn't stop laughing from the next room. Story 91. In an old apartment, I overheard my neighbors having sex. At one point, the woman screamed out some other guy's name, probably her side guy. My roommate yelled through the wall, "You ducked up now." She moved out later that week. Story 92. We found out that every time our lesbian neighbors were having sex, they would put on Guns N' Roses. I still can't listen to Welcome to the Jungle without giggling. Story 93. I've moved out now, but I used to live in such a place. Hearing arguments was pretty commonplace, and you could get pretty blasé about it. Until one night, I heard an argument about 11 p.m. coming from above. I had work the next day, so I was a bit pissed, but fell asleep anyway, despite them persisting in their shouting match. I woke about 2 or 3 a.m. roughly, with the female voice sounding out only one thing: "Help me, help me, help me." I don't think I've been so sure to call 999 ever in my life. The police came pretty quick, although I did not give a statement. They were there until 8 a.m., so it must have been something awful given the number of police that was there. I never did find out what really happened, and I don't think I ever want to. Just hope she was all right in the end. Story 94? Yes, finally! So, close to midnight, I started to hear a bunch random barking sounds from one of the apartments near me. Loud enough to wake me up. Then I start coming to and start processing what I'm actually hearing. And as it turns out, my neighbors were legitimately fighting, arguing back and forth, and it got to a point where all you could hear was things being tossed and the guy begging her to stop, and then I heard it. He sobbed, "Why would you look at my phone while I'm in the shower? You should have waited." Now, if you've ever heard a Hispanic woman go off on a guy, the insults start to meld into each other like machine gun fire. Turns out he'd been cheating a lot and had been gaslighting her for months. Then he caved. "Okay, yes, I cheated on you, but it's only because you were being negligent." She paused for a second, but it felt like a lifetime. I was stunned. This woman is always around. They're always going on camping trips and doing outdoorsy stuff. It's not like they work often or long hours. She began tossing more things, packed her stuff, and left after launching another barrage of insults. They're still together. Asshole blames his girlfriend for his cheating. Story 95. I could hear my neighbor regularly beat the crap out of his stupid girlfriend. Stupid, because even after the cops were called multiple times, she denied everything. The last time I got fed up with it and devised a plan. The next time he was beating her up, called the cops and had them come in, my apt and quietly, and listen from my bedroom so they could personally hear everything, and it worked. They busted in his door, arrested him, and let his ass sit out on the curb for 45 minutes in a 15-degree ice fog in his boxers while they took their time processing the scene. Never saw the asshole again. Story 96. At 12 a.m. on a weeknight, downstairs neighbors arguing, yelling. The woman was upset and said, "You'd be sad if anyone in your family died, but would you even care if I died?" And they went on, and eventually my BF got up and yelled through the floor, "Shut the up!" And all of a sudden she gasps and says, "Look, now they're telling us to shut up. That's on you. I feel bad because they're miserable. But I also feel bad for myself because this is on a near constant basis, and I never get a good night's sleep. Apartment complex life is crap. I can hear the husband snoring through the night. I can hear them chatting in bed. I can hear his alarm in the morning and her yelling at him to wake up. Same guy doesn't even say thank you when I hold the door open for him and has a dads against daughters dating sticker with a rifle on it so he can go duck himself." Story 97. When I first moved into my previous apartment, there was family living on the first floor right below us. When the parents weren't screaming at each other, they were screaming at their little girl. But we quickly realized they were moving out within the month, so we endured and hoped the next neighbors would be better. They weren't. 2 women moved in, and things were rocky from the start. The first night, they had incredibly loud sex. A few days later, the arguing began. From what we could gather, woman 1 wasn't sure they were ready to move in together, and woman 2 took that to mean she was having doubts about the relationship. For a few weeks, they alternated between sex and fighting. The last fight they had, woman 2 accused woman 1 of cheating, and woman 1 insisted there was no one else. Apparently, the relationship ended that night, only about a month after they moved in together. The next day, woman 2 moved out. That evening, woman 1 had a male friend over, and from the sound of it, she had definitely been cheating. Story 98. Heard my obnoxiously white female neighbor call her mixed-race daughter the N-word on several occasions. I never said anything about it until her baby daddy tried to pick a fight with me about 2 weeks ago. I'm an antisocial person by nature, so he was sitting on their porch and I accidentally made eye contact with him, didn't say anything to him, and just kept walking to my apartment. He jumped in my face and started claiming I was racist for not saying hi to a black man. His yelling caused all the other neighbors in the area to come out to see what was going on. I told him flat out, "You want racism? I've heard your baby mama call her daughter the N-word several different times. Ask any of these neighbors. They'll tell you the same thing." Long story short, that caused a fight that lasted until about 3 a.m. the next morning. They got evicted and moved out over this past weekend, and I've never been happier to see someone move. Story 99. Overheard my very sweet and friendly-looking neighbor scream at her boyfriend that she wanted to make the streets run red with the blood of his family. I never looked at her the same after that. Story 100. A drug bust, domestic disputes, lots of sex, and 1 died by gunshot. The died was the worst. I was with my girlfriend and we heard it. Sounded like a revolver at the range. I told my girlfriend I thought it was a shot. She convinced me I was crazy. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning and we had just gotten in from a party. The next morning, the police came to my door, and she immediately burst into tears. I told them what I heard and why we didn't call. It ducked her up for days. Later that week, we found out her father had cancer. Our relationship and her father died within the following 6 months. That was probably the beginning of the worst part of my life, which seems to keep dragging on. I think about that died a lot. Story 101. My upstairs neighbor, I thought his bed springs squeaked, so I thought he was having sex or jumping on his bed or getting in and out of bed all day long. I finally had enough and went upstairs and knocked on his door. He answered almost immediately, fully dressed. I just blurted it out. "It sounds like you're having sex all day." He totally laughed and asked me to come in. I followed him in, and he used the second bedroom as an office, and it was his office chair that squeaked. He sat on it, and it wasn't near as loud as it was in my apartment. I don't know if there's some scientific engineering of floors and walls reason for this, but he replaced the chair and put a rug under it. Best neighbor ever. And then he got a girlfriend and was actually having sex. Yep, heard that too. Story 102. Not an apartment, but my freshman dorm room had paper-thin walls. I heard my next-door neighbor banging his girlfriend every night, who was having very fake cess. On the other side lived my Ra, who would have nightly calls to his mom crying about how he wanted to commit died and how life wasn't worth living. That was a fun year. Story 103. My bedroom wall adjoined the neighbors. They got a divorce, and she stayed in the apartment. She proceeded to bring home a different dude every night for a month and would get pounded by them. I could hear everything. The slapping of ball sack on her, the moans, even minor ones, and even the gag when she took too much in her throat. Story 104. In college, I lived below a group of 18, 21-year-old guys. My roommates and I heard a pretty intense fight one night and almost called the cops because it sounded like they were getting violent. It went on for a half hour, lots of slamming, stomping, aggressive yelling. We couldn't quite make out what they were saying until we heard one of them yell, "Don't touch my Pop-Tarts ever again!" And he got in his car and left. My roommates and I exploded into giggles. Story 105. When I moved out for the first time into my new apartment, I, 22 per F, was completely alone at night and got scared of every little nose. One night on the first week of getting settled in, I heard a bunch of coughing, followed by panicked yelling, then silence. Shortly after, a fire truck pulls up in front of my apartment, and from my stairs, I watched them carry up a stretcher into my neighbor's apartment. They spoke with someone in the apartment for a while, then came back down with nobody in the stretcher. I thought my neighbor had died. I texted my neighbor to find out what was going on, wondering if he was dead, and he replied, "I choked on some ham because I'm a pig. I'm all right now." Story 106. My mom sneezed. We were alone together. I said, "Bless you." She said, "Bless you" at the same time. I thought she was joking. She thought I was. We searched the house because we thought it was a thief. It was the neighbor. He laughed. Story 107. I had a month-long trip through China and stayed at 3 different hotels where someone in the room next to ours were practicing the same tune on their recorder. Might have been the same person. Story 108. Stick your finger in it. I don't want to. Do it. Boyfriend presumably sticks his finger where the girlfriend told him to. See, it's not tight anymore. Loads of crying for the rest of the night. Story 109. I lived in a 1-bedroom a few years ago and was woken up in the middle of the night by a scream. Then the sound of throwing things, and what really scared me was when a woman screamed, "Somebody help me!" I was sure I was hearing my neighbor being murdered. I called 911 immediately, and when the sirens neared the complex, the guy who was hurting this woman bolted into the woods. They chased after him and caught him, took my statement, and I really hope she was able to stay away from him. I'm pretty sure it was a domestic violence situation that had reached a breaking point. Story 110. My upstairs neighbor used to blast the music and get really excited and stomp, clap, and yell, "Who?" really loud. It was so funny me and my husband never said anything about it. 4 years later, in a move to our own home, my husband will stomp his feet, clap, and make that sound when a good song comes on.